Welcome to the world's #1 fitness business podcast for health club owners, gym managers, and fitness entrepreneurs. As always, this will be a great show as we have another expert to help your fitness business and your career. We'd like to thank our premier sponsor, Active Management, for supporting us, and we highly recommend becoming a member of Active Management to strengthen your business in 2016. There are loads of resources members receive, so join the Active Tribe today at www.activemgmt.com.au. Now that's enough from me. Let's welcome the show's amazing host, Chantal. What's on this week's show?
Thanks, Harper. Hi, Tribe. Welcome back to another week of the show. This week's special guest is Susan Fowler. She's the author of a new book called Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does: The New Science of Leading, Engaging, and Energizing. Susan spoke at the Idea Summit in LA this year, so I am absolutely thrilled that she's agreed to come onto the show because her advice around leading and engaging people is invaluable in relation to how we deal with our teams as well as our clients. Tribe, do you remember a few weeks ago in show 73, I interviewed Rasmus Ingerslev. He's the chairman of URSA. And during the interview, he mentioned his new club, Repeat. Well, I've been following them on Instagram and I love the complete alignment and the understanding that they have of their primary target, which is millennials. I know that I bang on a lot about your target market and knowing your avatar and all that sort of gear. But if you want to see a club that is doing a really, really great job of it, then check out their Instagram feed and their Insta stories. They are under the name Repeat Fitness DK. I highly recommend that you jump on over and check that out. Now, before we get stuck into this week's main interview, I think you know that I'm always on the lookout for people to come on the show. So if you love what we do and you love podcasts and you fancy having your voice played out all across the globe, then I want to hear from you. Just head over to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com and click on the contact button. Send me through your details and I will be in touch.
The Fitness Business Podcast is very appreciative of our podcast partners. Here's a quick word from one of our partners.
Active Management helps owners and managers have the business work for them. Test the quality of resources with a free download at www.fitnessbusinesspodcast.com/active. This week's flashback show is show 31 with Casey Conrad, none other than Casey Conrad. And she talked about the very best advice ever on selling fitness and selling personal training. If you missed that show, you can go back and check it out. That is show 31, and you can find it on iTunes or on the website at fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. Now, in a few weeks' time, I'm going to be bringing you guys an interview that I recorded this week with the awesome Emmett Williams from MyZone. Emmett recently attended the MotionSoft Technology Summit, and he's going to tell us about some of the seriously interesting predictions for the future of fitness when it comes to technology. That show is coming up in 2 weeks' time. I know that you're going to love it. I got so much out of chatting to him. It's a really, really fascinating interview. So make sure you listen out for it, or of course subscribe to the show notes, and that way you will not miss a thing. Susan Fowler implores leaders to stop trying to motivate people. In her best-selling book, Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does: The New Science of Leading, Engaging, and Energizing, Susan educates leaders on motivation best practices based on solid science communicated through compelling storytelling, case studies, and real-life examples. Susan is dedicated to providing leaders around the world with cutting-edge framework, dynamic model, and pragmatic course of action to shape workplaces where people flourish while producing sustainable results. Susan is a professor in the Masters of Science in Executive Leadership program for the University of San Diego. She is a global speaker, consultant, trainer, and coach, and she is also the author of bylined articles, peer-reviewed research, and 6 books, including the best-selling Self-Leadership and The 1 Minute Manager with Ken Blanchard. Tribe, right at the beginning of this interview that I did with Susan, she shared with me a really personal story. And before I play you the recording, I just wanted to reach out and say thank you to Susan for sharing something that was so personal, and also to all of you listening to really think about what she says and what that means to you. I hope you enjoy today's interview. Susan, are you ready to Fitspire our global tribe of fitness business owners and managers?
I really honestly am.
Fantastic. Now, I've just shared your amazing bio with all of our tribe. You have worked with Ken Blanchard. You've written for the Huffington Post. It's all incredibly inspiring. You've had years of success. Is there any stories you can share with us about maybe a hurdle that you've come across along that journey?
How long is your podcast? I have a couple of things, Chantal, and I'm hoping that people might be able to relate to some of these. One is so top of mind because in the United States right now, we have something has come to the forefront of the conversation, and it's around sexual misconduct in the workplace. And I think there's a lot of women of a certain age where we were really fighting our way, through the bureaucracy or whatever, that we all have had to deal with those sexual encounters. And I actually blogged about it in my latest Huffington Post blog. So I hope that people might go on and read about that, because I think it's something that a lot of us had what I call assumed constraints, beliefs that that's just the way it is, that that's the way you've got to accept that people act. And it was demoralizing, demeaning, and frustrating. And I think about the person I am today, and I'm so grateful that I made some of the choices I did. But I also recognize that a lot of women and men don't feel they have choices. And so they get victimized by the actions of others. And so I think that I am most disappointed sometimes in my own lack of awareness around the choices that I've had and that I could have made. So I think that that's one of my biggest hurdles. One of the wonderful things about living long enough is that you learn from those mistakes, and then it's very rewarding to be able to be empowered, to stand up for yourself, to recognize those choices. I think one other thing I'd just like to say, because I don't get a chance to talk about this very often, but I had a sister. I said had because she passed away. My younger sister, Terry, who was born with a really debilitating handicap. And yet when she died, she was renowned in Denver, Colorado, and there's actually a plaque there that she was one of 7 people who were instrumental in getting handicapped rights and accessibility for people in wheelchairs. And when I think about my sister and what she contributed given her limitations, then it always spurred me to have to work harder. And I never understood really why I was so driven and why I had to work so hard. And then one day I realized it's because I felt guilty. I felt like if I didn't do what my sister had done, even much better because I didn't have those limitations, then I was disappointing myself and others. And what I have finally learned to do through the research that I've done, the books I've written, the work I get to share with others, is I now work hard because I choose to work hard, not because I'm driven by some form of shame, guilt, or fear of disappointment or letting people down. And so that's going to be a theme, I hope, for what we're talking about today, because I think that a lot of us don't understand why we do what we do. We don't understand that if we're driven, what's driving us. And so I think that's one of the greatest blessings I've had, is to have had a sister that inspired me, but also even after her death was so enlightening to me and my life and why I do what I do.
Susan, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's a beautiful story, and I think you're quite right in that so many of us go about our daily tasks and don't truly know why we do what we do. And I want to thank you for, bringing that to light. And as you say, hopefully we can discuss that more during your interview today. And I might also remind everyone that article that you mentioned at the beginning there that you wrote for Huffington Post, we will definitely grab a link for that from you so that we can share that with all of our listeners. So thank you. Now, I think it's really important that we get a proper understanding about your background and what you do, because I said during your bio that you're a professor in the Masters of Science in Executive Leadership at the University of San Diego. Now, that's quite a mouthful. Can you explain to us, what does all that mean?
Yeah, it's really one of the highlights of my professional career. I actually get to teach. One of the courses I teach is a week-long course with my husband, who has been the head of research and was a founder of the Ken Blanchard companies. And we do a week-long course, and then we follow it up with other courses. But we do a week-long course called Self-Preparation for Leadership. And the whole idea is that leadership comes from the inside, that you cannot hope to lead others if you don't understand what you bring to the moment of leadership. So we have actually executives, and hearing your Australian accent is fun because one of the men that was in our first cohort 18 years ago is Gary Ridge, who is the CEO of a really wonderful company here. It's a global company, but it's headquartered in San Diego, called WD-40. And Gary Ridge was in that first cohort, executive of this wonderful global organization. And ever since he went through it, every year he has sent at least one and oftentimes two or more of his executives through this 2-year master's program because it has so much impact. When you really start to understand what is your personality, how does your personality affect your leadership behavior? What are your values? How do your values help you make decisions? How do your values shape the way other people see you, the way they respond to you? And what is the persona? What is it that other people see that maybe you might not see? And so for a week, we really do deep exploration. And like this Christmas, we'll have a Christmas party. We'll have 18 years worth of alumni coming to this gathering, and they will always tell us that week changed their lives forever. And I like to think that what it's really doing is changing the lives of the people that these leaders lead. And that's our real purpose, is to help people thrive at work. And so you need leaders who understand themselves and are able to get out of their own way when they're leading others.
Susan, during that you mentioned that, when you come together, people sort of say that week was life-changing. When they talk about what they got out of the course, what are a few specifics that they would say that they really benefited from?
I think the one of the big things is that we actually give them data. And I would encourage any leader, you have a self-perception. But what we find in the research is that very often how you perceive yourself is not perceived by others the same way. So as an example, I'm a very extroverted person. I like to control my environment. And I think that I'm coming off as passionate and excited and collaborative and eager to hear other people's ideas because I have values around learning and collaboration. And I got feedback that oftentimes people heard me as dogmatic and as already determined to go in a certain direction, that my mind was made up, that I was pushing my ideas onto others. I had no idea. I mean, it was a revelation. Now, you can either ignore that, you can get mad by that, you can be hurt by that, or you can say, wow, that was not my intention. Why do people get that perception, and what can I do differently in order to counteract and be more authentic? So it's like you want to be authentic, but oftentimes people are not perceiving what you really are intending.
Do you think that this would be something that would be beneficial for fitness business owners to take part in?
Let me just say this, that here's my fear, is that a lot of fitness owners have a passion around what they do. They love working out. They love training. So they create this business, and they think that because they love what they do so much that their passion is going to rub off on their employees. And then they get frustrated when their employees don't act as passionately as they're acting. And so what I think they need to understand is that you can have values and act on those values, but what you really need to care about is what are other people's values and how are their values aligned with your values, and how do you even know what your people's values are? And I think they would benefit greatly from going through some kind of a course that helps them understand their personality type, helps them understand their values, and then gets feedback from their staff members to make sure that their intentions are what is coming across. So absolutely.
Great advice. Thank you so much for that, Susan. Now, listen, you've been blogging crucial questions that leaders need to ask every day. How many questions are there?
Well, I have to. Can I give you the essence or why I started this blog series called? It's called 3 Essential Questions, or 3 crucial questions that leaders need to ask every day, and it's based on what the science tells us about motivation, about how people come to thrive in the workplace. And most of our practices in the workplace are based on really old theories of motivation, like drive theory, and are based on results. Here are the results we need, and we need to incentivize people to get the results we need. And we know that that's just the opposite of what is true. And so I have got, oh my gosh, I'm sitting on piles and piles and piles of research by thousands of researchers globally, including my own and my husband's research. And I thought, how do I get through all of this research and all this data and get down to just 3 things that if leaders did them every day, they would actually be creating an environment where people have a chance to be optimally motivated. And so the 3 questions are based on the 3 psychological needs that science has proven that every human being on the planet needs to have satisfied in order to thrive. And when I say thrive, I mean to be productive, to have positive, sustainable energy, to be fully engaged over time at work, to have a sense of well-being, to be creative and innovative. And so if that's what you're looking for in your workforce, then you really need to create this environment. So the first question is based on our first psychological need for autonomy. And so the first question is, what choices do you have? Or you could do riffs on that. What choices did you make today? I would challenge your fitness gym owners, your people that are involved even in training sessions, that oftentimes what we do is we tell people what to do and what not to do. What we don't help them understand is the freedom or the choices they have within the boundaries. So we need to establish boundaries, but we also need to have the conversation with people about, okay, here are the boundaries. Now, what choices do you have within the boundaries? And at the end of the day, asking, tell me about the choices you made today and why you made those choices. Because people need to remember that they didn't show up to work because they had a gun at their head. They chose to come to work, but sometimes people feel like victims and they feel like they don't have choices. So anyway, that's the first major question that leaders need to ask.
Before you go on to the next one, do you think I could ask you to then put that question of autonomy and the questions that you asked in the context of, A, how could we utilize that when it comes to our members, and B, how could we utilize that when it comes to our staff and our teams?
Yeah, let me just give you an example. Let's say that I'm coming into your gym, I'm a prospective customer, and what often happens is the staff is so pressured to try to sign me that they start overselling me, and I feel like I'm being sold. And what happens is I actually recoil from that because I feel like you're pressuring me. Anytime anyone feels pressure, they are not experiencing autonomy. So the very way that you put pressure on your staff to make certain numbers or to get so many signups in a day or whatever, the way that's framed undermines the autonomy of your staff. Then your staff, who doesn't feel like they have a lot of autonomy, start pressuring me, and I now feel like I don't have any autonomy. If that staff member even just said to me, Susan, when it comes to your fitness goals, what choices do you have? And so I might say, well, I could walk every day. I could join a gym. That's why I'm here to talk about that. So get me talking about the choices I have. And then if the staff member said, well, let me help you understand how we fit into those choices, or let me actually even show you the choices we have here at the gym, because we have a number of different choices which might fit your lifestyle and your needs better than others. So staff members may already do that. They might already say, we've got 3 plans. You can choose from A, B, and C. But what they're doing is they're doing it in the form of pressure rather than focusing on, these are choices that I can offer that somebody will actually then feel a sense of gratitude for, not pressure.
So what I'm hearing is that it's really important that we consider the way that we frame the conversation.
Oh, totally. Totally. Because it's not that a person needs to have autonomy. In other words, they don't have total freedom. What they have is a perception of choice, and they have a perception of control, that they are in control of their environment. And so much of what happens in the workplace is working to rid people of a feeling of choice and control. You know, Chantal, if any of your listeners have a baby, just ask them to think about what it was like when they were trying to feed their baby. And that baby all of a sudden shuts his mouth and will not let the spoon in his mouth. There is no way you're prying those little lips open. Sometimes that baby will even grab the spoon from you and try to feed himself. He can't even find his mouth, but he wants to control what's going into it. So what the science is showing us is that from the very beginning of our existence, we have a need for autonomy, a feeling of choice, that we have some control over our lives. And we see it at work even in babies.
Autonomy is number one. You mentioned that there are 3 crucial areas and questions that leaders need to ask every day. What's number 2?
You know, the second one is where I think we have probably the most opportunity for growth. And the psychological need is called relatedness. And relatedness is people's sense that they belong. It's their sense that they are working with people that care about them and that they can care about. Because caring about somebody is just as important, if not more important, than feeling cared for. And that they have a sense of purpose and meaning in their work. So an example, I do a lot of work in the financial industry, and what happened with, and I just wrote a blog about this as well, what happened at Wells Fargo, which is a major, bank, that their president just had to quit, and a bunch of people, thousands of people got fired, and they've been fined hundreds of millions of dollars because they were under so much pressure, which is lack of autonomy, to make sales that they were fraudulent, and they were opening up, like if I was a Wells Fargo, I had an account, they were opening up fraudulent accounts in my name and actually putting those charges on my bank account without my knowing it. So it was rampant, right? And my blog was about the fact that I really felt that this was thoughtful fraud, that the bank actually was courting disaster, because if you go to their website, their value is around trust. And there's this whole thing about, you can trust us. We're going to demonstrate trust every single day. Okay, but here's the thing. Do you think one sales manager asked at the end of the day, how did you live our value of trust today? What meaning did you take from your work today? How did you make a contribution to someone else's growth or well-being today? We just don't ask our employees those kinds of questions. And so I would just love for fitness directors, just try this. At the end of every day, ask, tell me what you did today that was really meaningful to you. Tell me what you did today that made you feel good because you felt like you really contributed to someone else's well-being. I have to tell you, if we started asking those kinds of questions, it would be a very different world. Not just workplace, it would be a different world.
I want to put that challenge out to our tribe, Susan, because I think there is so much in what you just said, and I think that's an opportunity that we can all take back to our workplaces and to our businesses and implement those questions that you're talking about and see what the outcome is. Thank you for sharing
Chantal,
those.
Yeah, think about this. I mean, you're in the fitness industry. I mean, you're in the business of well-being. And yet how many of your trainers, your salespeople, your staff members at the end of the day really are in touch with the good that they did? That's what we need to focus on. Not what numbers did you get, or how many people did you train, or how many hours did you book, but what difference did you make today?
It's really funny you say that, because I've quite often over the years had conversations with group fitness instructors in particular and said to them, do you realize what type of an impact you actually have on people's lives? And I think you're quite right, and that is that quite often we actually do not realize the impact that we have. And as I say, I think by implementing those questions and asking those questions that you have asked, hopefully that opens up some conversations and makes us think that little bit further than, as you say, not just about the numbers and the money, but what it is that we're actually doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, and while you're doing, and Chantal, can I just also just share with you something that I think is really, really relevant to your audience? It was a study done by Dr. Brandon Irwin from Missouri State University, and he started out researching what was it that fitness coaches did that really helped them to be good coaches. So they were looking at the coaching methodologies and then also measuring the results of their clientele. And they found something that they weren't expecting to find. They found that the coaches that really were the ones who were yelling and screaming at people and encouraging them vocally, like, come on, one more. I know you can do one more. Come on, let me see you do it. That kind of stuff, the kind of stuff you oftentimes hear in gyms, the pump it up. Come on, you can do it. Actually had the worst results of any of the coaches. And so I called Dr. Irwin because I had an idea of why I thought that was. He was reporting the results, but he hadn't talked about why he thought that was the case. And I thought I might know. We ended up talking for 2 hours, and now we've become kind of pen pals. And he's actually doing further research around what he and I talked about. And what we are now realizing is that the more you verbally coach someone, then you're externalizing the motivation. You're externalizing where that energy is coming from, which rids people of their inner sense of autonomy. So it's like, oh, you're telling me to do this one more. I'm not telling myself to do it. So they don't have as much internal energy. It gets dissipated. But the second thing that's really powerful is around relatedness. That second psychological need is that inevitably, when they measured people's feelings with the vocal coaches, you know what the results were? The people being trained said they thought that the reason that these coaches were so vocal was because it was their own ego. It's because they wanted you to do more because it made them look good. It was more about their results than your results. It actually totally undermined people's sense of relatedness. And so he said that in their study, by far the most successful coaches were the ones that made sure people understood what the goals were very clear about the techniques that were needed to be used and what time, the time frame, and then stood by and were non-verbally supportive.
Tell us, Susan, what's the third question we need to ask?
So, Chantal, the third question that people need to ask is regarding the third psychological need for competence. So we have ARC, A-R-C, autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And competence is people's need to feel like they can deal with whatever life throws them. They need to feel like they have the skills that they need to achieve the goals that have been set. They need to feel like they're effective in everyday challenges, that they're mastering something. So the question that I ask you to ask your people at the end of every day, along with what choices do you have, and what choices could you have made, or what meaning did you take from today? How did you make a contribution? We also need to ask, what did you learn today? What did you learn today that will help you be better tomorrow? So just imagine if you're training me and at the end of our session, you asked me, Susan, what did you learn today? And what I would realize is, wow, I learned how to use my core muscles differently than I've ever used them before. So what you've just reinforced to me is that this session was really worthwhile. If you're my boss, at the end of every day, if you say, Susan, what did you learn today? And I say, I learned that when I do a soft sell, I actually sell more than when I try to pressure my clients and my customers or potential customers. Wow. Okay. So how are you going to implement that more tomorrow? Those are the conversations we need to be having. But I swear to gosh, I think what most managers do is at the end of every day, we ask about numbers, we ask about hours, we ask about all these metrics, but we forget that people need choices, meaning, and a sense of learning and growing every single day.
I feel like in the space of about 20 minutes, you have given us so much amazing information and so much practical information that we can take into our workplaces. I want to say thank you so much for that, Susan, because I've found it to be an absolute eye-opener and something that I feel like so many of us will be able to utilise what you've already shared with us. There's one last thing that I'm hoping that you can leave us with today, and that is I'm hoping you can give us what we like to call a bit of fitbizspiration, and that is your top 3 business tips to building a world-class culture within our fitness businesses. Tribe, before we hear Susan's top 3 tips, here's a quick word from our newest podcast partner, Precor. Tribe, if you haven't explored a functional training space for your gym, then now is the time. With Queenex Functional Training by Precor, there is a unit to fit every space. Plus, education is included to ensure that training is delivered with confidence. You need to jump online and check this out right now. Go to precor.com/fitness business podcast. Now let's go back to Susan as she leaves us with her top 3 tips for building world-class coach culture in our workplace.
Well, the reason I wrote my book, Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does, is because I am convinced through the science of motivation that it is our basic nature to thrive. And that for the first time in our history, we have the science that understands what it takes to help people thrive at work. And so if we are building a workplace where people have a sense of autonomy, a sense of relatedness, and a sense of competence, where people are experiencing optimal motivation every day, as opposed to what typically they experience as suboptimal motivation based on rewards, power, incentives, pressure, stress, if we can do that, then we literally have a chance to wake up every day and make the world a better place. And when I think about your gym owners, you're in the well-being business, you're in the fitness business, and you have a chance every day to make someone's life better. And I hope that these ideas could really literally revolutionize the way you treat the people that you hire and that are on your staff and the people that you train.
Susan, you're doing amazing work, and I'm so grateful that you've come on the show today because, as I said, I feel personally as though I've learned so much just from spending, 20 minutes talking to you, and I really hope that all of our tribe can take away and implement many of the pieces of advice that you've given us today. So I want to say, on behalf of myself and the show and all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today on the Fitness Business Podcast.
Thank you, Chantal. It's my privilege.
Precor Quickfire 5.
Tribe, I am here today with Chuck Runyon, the CEO at Self-Esteem Brands, Anytime Fitness and Wax in the City. Welcome along to the show, Chuck.
Thank you, Chantal. Excited to be here.
Really excited to have you. Now, are you ready for your Quickfire 5 questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, why do you do what you do?
I want to get as many people as possible to a healthier place. And that means our members, our club staff, our employees, our franchise owners. If I can get them to a healthier place, I know they will live a better life.
And what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
I always like that if you're trying to keep everyone happy, you're doing something wrong.
And what's a personal habit that helps you become better at what you do?
I know this is going to sound not very surprising, but I need to work out, or I need to do some physical activity every day to optimize my mental acuity, my energy level, my mood, and my stress. So, physical activity, I like to sweat at least 6 days a week, if not 7.
I love that. I think lots of our listeners will agree. And what's one book that you'd recommend and why?
I love the book Abundance by Peter Diamandis, especially, in the U.S. here, we're going through an election year. And of course, there's so much doom and gloom by our politicians. And if you read the book Abundance, it will change your outlook on, the positivity and the future of what's happening around the planet.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. We'll check that out. And why should our tribe come back and listen next week?
Well, I think I can give them some secrets on how to make more money and how to live a more purposeful life.
Love the sound of that. Chuck, thank you so much for coming on today with your Quickfire 5 questions.
Thank you.
It's time for the Fitness Business Podcast Wrap.
Rather than have a handful of takeaways for you, this week I just have one big one. It's so important that I don't want to dilute it, so here it is. Susan said, at the end of every day, rather than focusing solely on numbers and data, ask your team, what did you do today that was meaningful? What did you do today that made you feel good because you contributed to someone else's well-being?
Get ready for this week's bonus segment, your extra injection of information, education, and inspiration to strengthen your fitness business.
Tribe, it's my pleasure to be introducing you today to our regular listener. I'm speaking today to Carmen Nanalo from Anytime Fitness in the USA. Welcome to the show, Carmen.
Hi, Chantel.
Now, you're the owner of 8 Anytime Fitness clubs. That's sensational. How long have you been involved with Anytime Fitness?
Yeah, so I started with Anytime Fitness just over 10 years ago.
Oh, that's sensational. And tell us, whereabouts in the States are you based?
So I'm in the Midwest in Wisconsin, so just north of Chicago.
And where are your clubs located?
So they are located, 4 of them are located, the most concentration is in Appleton, Wisconsin.
Excellent. And the other ones?
The other ones are just south of there in some smaller communities.
Well, listen, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. We're going to ask you a few questions today about podcasts. Let me first ask you, why do you like podcasts?
Podcasts for me are key. I drive quite a bit, so my furthest club is about 2 hours from my house. And so a lot of times that time is either fairly early in the morning or somewhat late at night. I usually try to fill that time with phone calls, but oftentimes that's not a feasible thing. So podcasts are perfect because it's just automatic, comes into my phone, and I'm able to fill that drive time with some valuable info.
It's a great time to be listening.
Yeah.
And tell us, with the Fitness Business Podcast in particular, first of all, thanks for being a regular listener. What is it that you like about the show?
I just love that the information is relevant to obviously what I'm doing. And then the guests are just from such a wide variety. It just helps. It's such an easy way to stay on track with what's happening or new things that are, trending in the fitness industry, or even just different opinions from different people outside of, for me, a lot of the resources that I have are inside of, a specific franchise. And so to be connected with the larger fitness community is key, I think. And
tell us, from the shows that you've listened to, do you want to maybe share with us a couple of insights or ideas that you've been able to take away from the shows?
Yeah. So I know I have a couple written down here. The first would be Casey Conrad. I mean, I've worked with her before. The best thing I love about her is she's just no nonsense, right? She has a systematic approach to sales. And I like that reinforcement of the items that she talks about. I've actually had her in training some staff in the past. And so she's always going to be probably my top, no matter what, just that reinforcement of some of those things that she provides. So next one would be Adrian Antigua. That one's the next two are fairly recent. And the Adrian interview, one of the things that I really liked is he's talked about starting, running, and growing his group training side. Coming from a outside, very large club, and just the way that he talked about how retail centers, will distinguish certain areas, and that we essentially need to do the same thing inside of clubs if you're running, any kind of a group training program. And just some of those things that he talked about, how he incorporated it into it and how he differentiated, for me, were really key.
There were some good practical examples in that one, wasn't there?
Yeah, exactly. Because he talked about the transition from, going the more traditional model. And then he mentioned creating that boutique, right, within the club. Because for all of us, we're competing with those boutiques right now.
And what about the third one?
Third one would be, this is very recent, but Andrew Simmons, I just listened to it actually this morning, but is talking about monetizing weight loss challenges. And I know it's something simple, right, but it's just another way to be able to do it. Other brands do this outside even the fitness industry, more health and weight loss companies do, but it's such an easy way to monetize it and add some revenue. So that was just interesting, something we have not done in the past.
Yeah, they're 3 really great examples. Thank you so much for those, Carmen. And I might just remind everyone, Casey Conrad was with us in show 31. The Adrian Antigua one was show 50. And Andrew Simmons, that most recent one, was show 67. So if you missed any of those, you can head over to the website to check them out. So Carmen, let me ask you this. Who would you like us to interview in the future, and what would be one question that you'd like us to ask?
Yeah, so my one person, it's kind of along a similar thing, but it's similar to the Tribe team training. But another one would be Rick Mayo of Alloy, just asking when he realized that programming side could really become a business model, and how he made the succession, from a PT studio to realizing that he had a product to sell to, health clubs all over. I think that's what I would ask.
Rick Mayo is a great suggestion. We might we'll reach out and see if we can get in touch with him and get him on the show. So I want to say thank you so much, Carmen, for being a regular listener, and also for coming on the show and being our listener guest for today.
Excellent. Thanks, Chantel. Thanks for having me.
so much. Since recording this interview with Carmen, we have reached out to Rick Mayo and our fingers are crossed that he agrees to coming on the show. So Rick, if you're listening, this is your shout out. We would love to get you on to share your experience and your advice. Tribe, thank you so much for joining me for another week of the Fitness Business Podcast. And remember, what you leave behind is not what's engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others.
Great show this week that you should be suffering DOMs, delayed onset mind soreness, as you are overloaded and that's when your mind is strengthened. You and your business have been strengthened thanks to the amazing support of our premier sponsor, Active Management. Check out www.activemgmt.com.au only if you want to strengthen your business and your leadership. Don't forget all today's links and notes are found at www.fitnessbusinesspodcast.com, where you can also subscribe and never miss a show and maybe win a prize. Next week is another incredible guest with Chantal, so get ready for more Fit Bizpiration.